Welcome back to Fresh Outlook, everybody. President Barack Obama proposes a 10-year budget that analysts say stabilizes the federal deficit, but does not seek balance. Instead, it focuses on policies to address income inequality or redistribution of wealth, as he adds nearly $6 trillion to the debt. Let's say hello to the Fresh Outlook think tank. I am joined by Matt Tyrmand. He is a healthcare portfolio manager, and he runs a website called openbooks.com. I am also joined by Professor Bill Rodgers. He is the chief economist of the Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rodgers. And I'm also joined by Dr. Vince Aletto, who is a board-certified ER doc. He's the guy you want to see if you're in a jam. Okay, let's turn first to Bill. Bill, tell me about the budget. When I hear budgets and spending plans, even as a journalist, I kind of like nod off like a lot of Americans do. So what's this budget all about? It's instead of just 1 year, it's 10 years. And I also don't think he's passed a budget ever, has he?
Well,
I asked you 9 questions there. I take them as you
I mean, President Obama, I think this is a budget that I think he would have liked to have put in place or advanced when he was first elected in the first term. When I worked on his transition committee, one of our committees at the Department of Labor, our mantra was around sort of restoring some of the gains that workers had been losing and families had been losing over the last basically 2 to 3 decades because of rising income inequality. But as we know, because of the Great Recession and the slow jobs recovery we've had, job one was to just sort of get the economy, save the economy.
Exactly.
And so this budget is really, to me, is a statement of his values, finally showing out that he really does care about these long-term structural problems, this growth in income inequality that is now seeped up into the middle class. He calls it middle class economics. I call it Alice economics, where here in New Jersey we've sort of created this household family called Alice, called Asset Limited Income Constrained and Employed. And these are families who live in our communities, about a third of our New Jersey communities, households that can't make ends meet. Because of the kinds of jobs that they're in, because of the strain that they're facing in terms of their child care, health care.
So how does this budget help them? Does it help them by lowering their taxes? Does it help them by giving them credits?
Exactly.
How would all those things?
Yes, yeah. So he's coined this phrase middle class economics, which is about taxing a higher part of the income scale and using those funds to pay for a child care credit, to pay for investments in education, investments in training, because again, the big framework here is around trying to do what the United Nations calls, and that's invest in human priorities expenditures. And some research that I've done over the last few years has shown whenever we've slowed down our investments in human priorities, education, training, households in terms of helping their child care, investing in communities and libraries, investing in our infrastructure, we've seen income inequality rise. So it's his first budget to really try to get at these big issues.
Okay, now here's the problem I have. We've heard this talk now for 6 years. We've heard about shovel-ready jobs. We've heard about $1 trillion investment in our country. And I don't know, I drive down the roads seem like they're falling apart. The jobs that are created seem like they're largely created by the private sector, and the wealth that's created seems like it's created by the private sector. So there's a lot of people out there like me who don't have a lot of faith in the government to level the playing field other than the government just getting out of the way.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the sort of wild, wild west approach doesn't work. Back in the 1980s, when we had significant economic growth, we grew and the pie got bigger, but that's one of those periods where income inequality got worsened. And why was it worsened? It was because of conscious policy decisions that had less focus on investing in these human priority expenditures that the United Nations so focuses on. While in the 1990s expansion from 1992 to 2001, there we had the pie growing. We had the pie growing, but it was growing, yes, because the government did get out of the way, but the government also provided incentives for individuals to invest in themselves. It provided incentives and programs and opportunities such as raising the minimum wage, expanding the earned income tax credit, which is supported by Republicans. But these were all policies that distinguished the 1990s growth to the 1980s growth. 1990s, we grew, the pie grew, but we grew together because we made conscious decisions like this budget is trying to do.
Matt Matt Tyrmand's going to tell me that we grew in the early 90s because it had been set up by 8 years of President Reagan.
I would agree.
I'm just reading your mind. A big part of this budget is healthcare. And healthcare costs, according to some estimates, that Obamacare is actually not going to be as expensive as they thought. But that's because fewer people, many fewer people than they thought, are actually enrolling in it. Talk to me about Obamacare and its implications for the budget.
Well, the whole idea behind Obamacare, the idea that was sold to the American public, was if we bring more people onto the insurance rolls, we will drive down the per unit cost. And at the same time, you would bend the cost curve on the consumption side. So by having more people consuming, you would then have an embedded economy of scale taking hold. But what they failed to do in Obamacare, and after reading the 2,500-page document in 2009, where it was contradiction after contradiction, was that costs were obviously going to go up because there was no clarity on delivery mechanisms. There was no innovation. There was one good component of Obamacare, which was they were going to put a lot of money into healthcare information technology, healthcare IT, and that was going to regulate data, would keep it consistent, compatible, and easily transferable so that everything would be mechanized and people would, all the practitioners and deliverers would have access to this data, and then you'd have better expected outcomes because you'd have more information at your fingertips. That was a $10 billion part of a $1 trillion program. And what we've seen now 5 years in is that most of those high-tech act potential beneficiaries in doctors' offices have not actually embraced healthcare IT because this thing was slapped together in a way that there was no strong incentives built in. It was just, we'll throw money at it, and if we build it, so to speak, they will come. They haven't.
I'm going to hold you there. Vince, you're on the front lines of this. Mm-hmm. People come into your ER and they're sick. Some have health insurance, some don't.
Yes.
A friend of mine works as a doctor in Massachusetts where they have universal health care. He said before universal health care, about 80% of the people had health insurance. After universal health care, about 80% of the people had health insurance. People aren't necessarily, getting Obamacare because they don't want Obamacare, it seems. Is that your experience, that there's not really much of a change in the numbers?
Yes. In the ER, we still see this, we see a lot more people who are uninsured since we had this fiscal debacle back in 2007. A lot of people did lose their insurance, but we've always had a steady number of people who do not. I think that statistic is always going to be that statistic. People don't get it for whatever reason. They don't want it. They're too lazy. They can't afford it. There's always going to be a percentage of people who don't have insurance.
Bill, I know this gets your goat because I know you worked with the transition team. You're interested in Obamacare. And I really do think this was the road to heck that was paved with good intentions because there were supposedly 45 million people who needed health care. How come they're not knocking down the door to get it? Because you can get subsidies, you can get onto Medicaid. I mean, there's lots of ways to access health insurance now.
Yeah, I think for the viewers, I think the big point to kind of pull away from this is, it's good to focus on the cost, but I think there's so many times when we get in these conversations, particularly we started the segment off about the budget. We're in this sort of framework, this conversation, this dialogue. The dialogue is around we can't afford it. As
a government, as a people, as a public.
Yeah. Exactly. When we need to focus on the benefits. One of my first sort of policy experiences was being on a school board. And one of the phrases that I was taught early on by some of my senior colleagues was, let's build a budget of need. And when we have these conversations where we just so focus on the cost sides of things, and we focus on, we can't afford it, when we're losing sight of that like for the Obamacare piece, this is trying to address healthcare issues that have become public health problems. Right? I mean, your earlier segment about measles, right? I mean, it really, that's a perfect example of, wow, here you have a healthcare issue that's now become a public health problem. And so when we have these conversations, we need to make sure that we're having both sides of that ledger being talked about, because otherwise, and the president loses his footing when he gets caught up and pulled into the whole, we can't afford.
Part of the problem is to many people, it's un-American. It smacks of European socialism to have all these policies where money is taken from one group, given to another group, redistributed, everybody gets everything, let's level the playing field. What people like about America is the fact that you can work your tail off, you can get ahead, you can become an overnight sensation, and that might not happen to most people, but it happens to some people, and that's enough to drive that American dream.
Yeah, but the one problem I think is there's been a number of studies that have been coming up and been produced that have seemed to suggest that the ability for individuals to sort of progress and move up the income scale, like you've said, that's become much harder because we have basically sort of pulled back on our investments in these human priorities, such as investments in education, investments in training, helping families and communities respond to a Superstorm Sandy and be able to move faster. I mean, we're basically at a fork in the road right now where we've sown the seeds for another growth in inequality, and I think the way we have to sort of respond to this is what we do with the United Way, where we have broken up. We talk about Alice, his family, and we talk about these are the direct effects to Alice. But we're also trying to show people this is how Alice, when she has substandard housing, affects all of us in this room.
Absolutely. I've got to hold you there just because we're running out of time. When we return, we're going to talk about the FCC and their new role and their powerful new rules in protecting the internet. When we come back. Welcome back to Fresh Outlook, everybody. I'm your host, Logan Crawford. The FCC is proposing regulating the internet service as a public utility, saying it is the right path to net neutrality. The plan would also, for the first time, give the FCC broad enforcement powers to police practices in the marketplace and a broad future conduct standard to cover unforeseen problems. Take a look.
The issue of whether or not internet service providers can legally control connection speed, access, or interrupt web browsing with commercials are some of the core issues around net neutrality. Net neutrality became a hornet's nest which swarmed when the FCC chair Tom Wheeler proposed rules which public interest groups worried would create fast lanes for companies that pay up and relegate others to slow lanes. Now, before the Federal Communications Commission can make rules, there is a period of public comments. And this issue brought in nearly 4 million comments to the FCC. President Obama sided with public interest.
The idea of net neutrality has unleashed the power of the internet and given innovators the chance to thrive. And that's why I'm urging the Federal Communications Commission to do everything they can to protect net neutrality for everyone.
Shares of major internet service providers Comcast Corporation and Time Warner Cable fell sharply after the announcement.
We are back live on set here on Fresh Outlook. Let me introduce you to the Fresh Outlook think tank. I am joined by Matt Tyrmand, Telecom Portfolio Manager, and also from openbooks.com. I'm also joined by Dr. Jose Lopez of Seton Hall University, who is our science guy. And joining us via Skype is Dr. Jonathan Askin of Brooklyn Law School. Jonathan, let me start with you and ask you, what is net neutrality? We've heard it a million times. It doesn't really sink into us people who are learning impaired.
The problem is net neutrality is a very inartful term for a very simple concept. And the concept is to ensure that the end user can maximize control over their internet and communications experience without the controller of the pipe, the carrier, determining what the user can do when they're online, what content they can receive, what apps they can access, what media they can stream.
But John, right now it seems like that's how it is. And it seems like somebody's going to control it. Either free enterprise is going to control it or the government. And I think you've heard my political leanings. I'm a little libertarian. I'd rather let free enterprise control it. What are your thoughts?
Well, frankly, my leanings are libertarian as well. And I feel like we've got the opportunity to let a million flowers bloom online, but for the fact that every user has 1 or 2 gatekeepers to the open internet. So we're talking about one very simple principle. Make sure that gate is open and as wide as possible so that it's the user and not Verizon or Comcast or that other intermediary who can control what access they can receive. I would think from a libertarian perspective, you would want as many options as possible. And those options only come when it's the user who has the authority to figure out what they want to do with their wide open internet experience.
Okay, let's turn to our big government guy, Jose Lopez. I'm just kidding you, Jose. Talk to me about your thoughts on net neutrality. Is this something where you want to see the government intervene?
Yes,
Okay.
I do. I think it's one of those areas where there's so many players in the field right now that if we do truly have a capitalistic economic system, some of them have to get weeded out. And that is happening right now. But the government has to also help regulate for the public interest. I mean, this is a question of what is the purpose of government? That's the first thing that a lot of people have. The purpose of government is for the betterment of its population. And this is one of the things. The internet right now is it's at a stage where it's a necessity for all of the American and the world's population. They need it to do their work, to prosper, and to do well. So, and if that's being infringed upon, which I think a lot of the companies are doing these days, if they're talking about regulating the pipeline where some groups have faster internet service or get faster, better service than other people does, what that does, it just really stops our development and our progress.
Let me turn to Matt. Matt, what are your thoughts about this? I know you're obvious. I would think you're for net neutrality, but maybe not imposed by the government.
I am all about all sorts of neutrality, but when the government comes in and regulates, there's nothing neutral about it. They are right now picking winners and losers. You know who the big winner from this term net neutrality, which I think is a misnomer? It's Netflix. Netflix during prime time clogs up the quote-unquote pathways with 34% of the volume.
But I'm on it, Jose's on it, you're on it.
And you know what? There should be a prioritization, and if Netflix is clogging up that capacity, they should pay for it in the free market, and those costs should be passed on to the consumer. The end effect of what's going to happen here is by picking this level of winning and losing, a company like Netflix that gobbles up so much capacity, is that the providers, Comcast, Verizon, and there are many competitive providers out there, they are going to have less incentive to upgrade networks. So when Netflix then comes out with its newest iteration of data delivery, and it's a higher definition, and it's going to clog up more of the bandwidth, we're going to see more clogages. We're going to see much more. And that's what always happens when the government comes in and says, we're doing this for your best interest. The unintended consequences here, to anybody who really is involved in the telecom markets, everyone sees the writing on the wall. You're going to see much, much worse networks.
Tell me about the FCC chairman, his role in all of this, and do you see him as overreaching?
Absolutely. So Tom Wheeler, very interestingly enough, is from industry, from the lobbying side of industry. He ran NCTA and CTIA, which are the two biggest lobbying groups in telecommunications. And so he spent his career lobbying for government to protect his industries. It's always been sort of a Faustian bargain between most of the Fortune 100, Fortune 500, and government. We don't have free markets, as you and I have talked about before. It's very, very anti-competitive. There's a lot of cronyism and protectionism, and that's what the lobbying industry exists to do. This guy has been the leading telco lobbyist who has been more concerned with grabbing power and designating it because that provides clarity, which they can then buy influence in and buy privilege in. And what you see now with this FCC, you've got a 5-person panel who is going to be voting on this 350-page bill on February 26th. There's 2 Democrat appointees, 2 Republican appointees, and Wheeler appointed by Obama. Everyone knows this thing's going to pass 3-2 on a straight party line vote. But the real interesting thing is, just like Obamacare, they won't allow anyone to see it. Nobody is allowed to read this bill. Obviously, some lobbyists know how it's going to affect their sub-industries because everything in D.C. leaks out.
But this is the most transparent administration in the history of Washington. Let's turn to Jonathan in Washington. Jonathan, what are your thoughts on that? Is there going to be winners and losers, and it just depends on who the winners and losers will be, whether it's governmental winners and big industry winners? What are your thoughts?
Well, we haven't seen the multi-100-page document, so we can't fully assess who the winners and losers are. The goal is to make this as neutral as possible in order. I think Matt misstates when he says that the big winner is Netflix. I frankly think that the big winner is likely the Netflix of the next generation. Now, Netflix has the capacity to pay for paid prioritization. What about the small upstart video provider that wants to take on Netflix and take on Comcast video offerings and Time Warner? They're the ones that can't pay for paid prioritization, and they're the ones that consumers will never have access to, but for a concept that ensures that that end user can reach that content that otherwise doesn't have the wherewithal to reach them.
But Jonathan, who's actually in Brooklyn, not Washington, D.C., I'd like to start up my own TV network, but I don't have the wherewithal to do that either. I mean, there's some disparities in life. That's just how it is, right?
No, you absolutely do have the wherewithal to start your own TV network. That's the power of the internet.
Yeah.
You live in a world right now in the 21st century where you have the power of the largest media empires of 100 years ago. Yeah. You have the power of one person to reach billions of people if, in fact, we have a principle that says you have the ability to reach the end user without the gatekeeper saying you are less worthy than Comcast, than Fox, than Netflix.
All right, Jose, you're agreeing with that, and I'll let you get to that after that, Matt.
The dirty word here, and if this is a debate people were having in the 1920s, so this is deja vu all over again, is regulation. This is like electricity. This is like the telephone companies. AT&T survived that. All of the Con Edison and Edison's companies, all of that survived that. Electricity is a necessity. I don't know if anyone will disagree with me in the 21st century on that. Telephone is something that is also a necessity there. These are things that are regulated by government that everyone has. I believe every city, every kid, every person should have an ability to have access to broadband, to the internet, to be able to use it. And that is what is going to cause more progress. Better capitalism will work better in such an environment. When you allowed electricity to be used, things from refrigerators to toasters to you name it, to microwaves, to televisions, to everything came of that. The internet is that type of technology. It's that type of thing.
Matt, you got to agree on some level that openbooks.com, is that what it is?
Openthebooks.com. We aggregate government spending. And we see the waste that by nature accrues to government firsthand. I agree 100% with your statement that for progress to occur, you need to encourage this competition. But we get there different ways. You say we'll regulate it into existence. That doesn't work. Look at the most controversial segment of this new bill is Title II, which classifies broadband and ISPs, the delivery mechanisms, as a telecommunications service, as opposed to, as it was, which was an information service. The internet was an information service.
But it's more than an information service now.
Yes,
it really is
absolutely.
a telecommunications service.
But as an information service, it was largely untouched, and look at what has developed. Now by creating it, classifying it as a telecommunications service, I was not 100%, I was being a little facetious with Netflix as the big winner. The big winner is the government, because as a telecommunications service, you can now tax it in all sorts of different ways. And taxing is the most counter-stimulative regulation. If you look at the taxes in consumption in all of our telecommunication products, they have all gone straight up.
I'm going to stop you there just because we're running out of time. Let me turn to our friend in Brooklyn, Dr. Jonathan Askin. Give me your final thought on net neutrality.
10 years ago, the FCC abdicated its control over telecommunications, and we are now finally unscrambling the egg and making it clear that it should be the user who can control their internet experience and not that gatekeeper. That's all we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that the user has access to the infinite supply of content and media, the richness of the whole internet, and that can't happen if there's a single or a two-entity gatekeeper to the opening.
Okay, John, I'm going to hold you there, and I'm going to move on to Jose Lopez. Final thought, 10 seconds.
My final thought is government is for the people. It looks out for the people. Yes, there be extra taxes, be extra things, but who do you want regulating? Verizon and these major companies, how are they going to regulate themselves when they're profit-driven? The government is not about the profit-driven. It's about the betterment of society. So I think there has to be some regulation in there. I think what Tom Wheeler and President Obama are doing is where it needs to be going.
10 seconds, final thought, Matt.
I look at this conversation, and it's very reminiscent of Obamacare conversation. We're going to regulate choice and cost into the equation, and what's happened is there's less choice and the costs are going up. This is the exact same thing that's going to happen in telecommunications.
And in a fair market, there's a lot of pressure on New York City to drive down the cost of internet access. In Manhattan, I get it for $14.99 a month. So sometimes the free market works, but we will continue to talk about this as the days go on. When we come back, it is the lightning round for America's top anchorman, who seems to be a liar, liar, pants on fire, to the best Super Bowl commercials when we return. Welcome back, everybody, to Fresh Outlook. It is time for our lightning round. We're going to talk to some of our guests about the top stories of the week. Jose Lopez, will start with you. This Taiwanese plane crash, unbelievable images of it coming down over a highway.
I mean, that is everybody's worst nightmare. When I saw that, I mean, I have no words to describe that. I mean, that's what you don't want to happen.
Horrible. And Janie, it sounds like one engine went out and then they mistakenly turned off the other engine. That's the horrifying part of all this.
Human error, but it points out so graphically how life changes in an instant and how we could behold that just because somebody has the video thing going on their car.
Yeah, we're eyewitnesses to everything nowadays because of the phone. You can actually even hear the woman scream. I think it was a woman. Matt, tell me about these Asian airlines that keep on crashing and going down. Is something going on with Asian travel as far as you know?
Well, I think a lot of the Asian airline problems, aside from this one, have been with externalities and third-party forces like Russia. I mean, it's very, very odd what's going on in the world in the airline industry. I'd like to see it more competitive.
Interestingly, let's turn to the Brian Williams video now. Brian Williams was on the plane and he tried to land it safely. Moments before it went into the ground, he parachuted out.
For our good.
And thank goodness he's fine. I'm going to go do this twice. Fire him or keep him?
I mean, he's a big name. I mean, he made a huge mistake.
Fire or keep him?
I would say still keep him.
Keep him. Janie?
On probation.
Probation, Matt.
Fire him immediately. He lost all credibility.
All you have as a journalist, your stock in trade is one thing: truth, credibility, believability. This man that you're looking at right there tried to make himself the story, which is a mistake many journalists make. But Jose, he lied. Why do it? Imagine if John Kerry had done this, had said his helicopter had been shot down, or Barack Obama, or it's George W. Bush. He'd be like, "Good evening, I'm Brian Williams. Tonight, a politician in the crosshairs."
Right. What he did, I mean, I don't understand it. Was he stuck in the moment? I mean, I still don't understand.
Nobody
what
forgets being shot down. If I go out today and blow out the windshield of your car, you're going to remember it. But if I blow out Janie's windshield, you're not going to conflate the two or misremember.
Right, I agree.
Okay, Janie.
How can you not be able to report the truth when your job is reporting? It's just unthinkable.
Well, you know what I say? People who ascend to these extremely high levels have done untoward things most of their lives. They've gotten away with it. It's emboldened them, and it's empowered them. And as a psychological expert, I'm probably right.
I'm not going to argue with you.
You're the psychological expert?
No.
No, I'm talking to Janie as a psychologist. I'm an expert on everything. I'm a journalist, darn it. Matt,
I would like to add, you just cited John Kerry, and there's a great example of exactly this dynamic that you described. A couple years ago when Egypt was blowing up, it was a holiday weekend, and he was on his yacht off the coast of Massachusetts, and CBS went and staked it out, and they showed coverage of him in his swim trunks on his yacht. State Department at the same time was officially releasing a statement. John Kerry's in the office working on this Egypt crisis. CBS says, "We are watching him right now in his swim trunks. Would you like to change that statement?" They said, "No, that's our official line." That is the contempt they have for the people.
Well, that's when Hillary Clinton was at the airport dodging sniper fire. The voices in my head are asking me to ask you something, Janie.
Yes.
Is it possible that he got confused on this?
No. No, it's not possible.
This is our clinical psychologist, Dr. Janie Feldman.
That's my professional assessment of this situation. You've got to know what you're talking about. You make a living talking. You just have to be accountable for the words coming out of your mouth.
Okay, Jose, fire him or keep him. We're going to go now.
Okay.
Reevaluate.
You're convincing me. Okay, if those are my two choices.
Just because he's popular, let him host Brian, a talk show syndicated across America where he can cook and tell fabulous tales every day. But let's not make him the preeminent news anchorman of America.
Right, the face of NBC News, right.
I mean, that's...
Make him a pariah.
I mean, we knew MSNBC
I think it's time for retirement.
Absolutely.
Early retirement.
Absolutely.
You know what I say? His daughter played Peter Pan. Now he's auditioning for the role of Pinocchio.
Pinocchio.
Okay, let's turn now to the Pope. The Pope says he's not PC savvy. We're not talking about political correctness, but operating a computer. What do you think of Pope Francis?
Pope Francis is 78 years old. Okay, my grandparents are also not. We're also not computer savvy folks. Even my parents have a hard time. They're constantly asking me questions about things. So I mean, Pope Francis has many things on his mind aside from knowing how to chat on Google.
So we'll
Chat.
give him a pass. We're not going to fire him over this.
Absolutely.
Keep him, fire him, fail, or what's it? We'll keep him. Janie, what are your thoughts?
I'm thinking he's got to have a staff of I don't know how many people. There isn't somebody there who could sit him down one day. I'm sure he's very busy, very important stuff. But at this point, he's got such an eminent place in the world, so many people looking to him for information, ideas. It's how we communicate.
Wouldn't it be funny if he got into the Vatican and it was really run like GE? Like he was in a custom-made bespoke apparel suit. He was on 5 different computer screens at once and analyzing everything. And like he just put on the costume for show? Who knows?
Well, I'm a little
Matt?
less worried about his lack of PC savvy than his lack of economic savvy, which economics is the study of human behavior, and he seems to have a lot of problems getting that straight. Despite empirical reality of the last 100 years, he seems to be the most anti-capitalistic pope in history. I really miss John Paul II.
Okay, Jose Lopez, I'm going to let you chime in on that because it does, I'm a Roman Catholic, I must say,
So am I.
but he does grind my gears with all of his socialism that he espouses.
Look, he's supposed to be caring about the people, and economics, to its credit, is brought us a better living in general, but not everywhere in the world. And that's one of the things he's bringing light to. He went to the European Union, to the Council, he's talked to them. When he had the private meeting with President Obama, he's brought this up. He says, okay, economics works, capitalism works, but don't throw people away. They're not things. They're not cars. They're not styrofoam cups.
And also,
I agree with him on
when
that.
you say WWJD, I mean, I don't think he'd be a libertarian Republican, right?
I think that he would want.
I'll let you pass
I
on
think
that.
that he believed. If you read St. Augustine, there was a lot about free will. So I think that he would espouse the theory of not being told
Okay,
what
I'm
to
going
do.
to look at Jesus' monetary policy another time, and we'll have a whole another 15 minutes on that. Janie, I'm going to turn to you, and we're going to talk about the Super Bowl. Did you have a favorite commercial?
I loved the one with the dog, but I got to tell you, here's my line here.
Okay.
Super sentimental, tops, super sexy. And I'm going to say, taking a feminist position here, I like seeing other things besides how naked can women get and still be on TV.
Yeah, the dog commercial, we just showed a little bit of the Budweiser commercial. It told the tale of a dog that runs away, a puppy, and he is rescued by a horse when he is nearly attacked by a wolf. And an amazing narrative. If it's a 30-second spot, it's amazing. It might have been a minute.
It's a minute.
It
It's
is
a
a
minute.
minute. Okay. What was your favorite commercial?
Well, I thought that one had sort of a nice warm sensibility. By and large, I was pretty disgusted with most of them. I look at all these corporate citizens who are doing a lot of damage and engaged in protectionist rackets, and they're spinning a propagandist narrative Goebbels would be proud of, that we just want to hug all our customers, and that's certainly not the dynamic that we see in the real world.
But that's what it's about. It's not, when you're Coca-Cola, you're not about selling Coca-Cola because everybody buys Coca-Cola.
It's commodified.
It's
Yeah.
about humanizing the brand, making you feel good about Coca-Cola or feel about Budweiser. I mean, they're not going to show you a 70-year-old war vet at the VFW hall at 11 a.m. in the
Drinking a pint
morning,
of beer.
drinking a 40. They're going to show you a horse.
The best buds.
What?
Yeah.
That's what they're called, the best buds. That
Exactly.
was the tagline.
But Bud missed the mark really big on another commercial they did during the Super Bowl, really talking down to craft brewery.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that it really was emblematic that more of the commercials were really bad than really good.
See, the thing is, with the craft brewery shots that they took, I actually thought it was good, making fun of pumpkin ale, because there's this like Americana guy out there that doesn't really exist in the Northeast, but he's south of the Mason-Dixon line and he's east of Arizona, that thinks guys that drink, pumpkin ale are out of their minds.
You know what? They're losing a lot of share to pumpkin ale, which is why there's a shot
Oh,
across
exactly.
the
And that's
bow.
why they're trying to make it manly to drink Bud
Yeah.
and not pumpkin ale. I think I'd probably have a pumpkin ale. Dodge was another advertisement that got a lot of play. Could you hit it there? And is that the Dodge? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, now this talked about the wisdom of old people that they knew that Dodge was a comer. Janie.
How sweet is that? So we're looking at these lovely old people, and they're giving us their wisdom as to how to live a better life, and who's not going to buy into that? It's sweet.
And also the cruise line commercial where they used the words of JFK. I thought that was very, very powerful, and it actually made me pine for a president who was so eloquent that, 50 years or so after his death, his words would be used as a narrative for a commercial.
But I think the best commercial, and I'm going to be counterculture to everybody here, was the Microsoft one. I'll tell you why I like that one. It was about this little boy and his family who the little boy was born without legs, and then he has these prosthetics, and then they're using Microsoft and all of the different products that they have there to make a better life for him. I really thought the Super Bowl commercials go from hilarious to really silly to inspirational. I thought this one said, look, you could do so much. They could have done so much, Microsoft. They could have talked about the Xbox, could have advertised whatever, somebody watching YouTube or all these different things, but they went with that. I thought they were the real winners. That was a commercial that, when I was watching the Super Bowl, that really got me.
Okay, let's quickly talk about harsh winter. Has this winter thrown you a curveball? 10 seconds.
No, I think on the East Coast you have to expect this. I mean, it's up and down, and if you can't manage it, then why are you in government?
Janie?
You got to know with forecasting, things are subject to change, and if the weathercasters just told us that it might change last minute, be prepared,
they get
then
their
we
advice
wouldn't
from Brian
expect it.
Williams. That's a problem. Matt blames global warming, man-made global warming.
You know what I blame is ineptitude and degradation of the culture, where I remember when I was a kid, if there was 10 inches of snow, you'd go to school. That was only 25 years ago, and now no one goes to work if there's an inch and a half.
Exactly. We used to also walk to school. Matt Tyrmand, thank you for your time. Janie Feldman for your time. Dr. Jose Lopez, thank you for your time. That is it for this edition of Fresh Outlook, Ebru-TV talk show that does what else? Help you keep your outlook fresh and informed. I'm Logan Crawford, not Brian Williams. Thanks for joining us.